So, why am I here now? I've been toying with the idea of a podcast for a long time. But if I'm honest, one of the reasons I kept circling around it without actually doing it was because I kept asking myself the same question. What could I possibly add to an already noisy space? There are so many people talking, influencing. I love that word. Explaining, selling certainty, offering advice, filling every corner of the air with opinions. You know what I mean. And a lot of it feels so polished, so quick, so certain, so performative. I wasn't sure I wanted to even add one more voice to all of that. But over this last year, something in me kept stirring. It's still kind of stirring. Not like total distress or despair, but more like a chronic restlessness. In fact, my husband looked at me the other day and went, "Ooh, something is brewing in you. I can feel it." Because when this happens, I go much more inward, which for a person who's a very outgoing, loving to be social, always wanting to be in conversations and communication with people, the inward turn this past year has been my way of trying to figure out what this restlessness is about. And maybe you've experienced it too. Now, I'm a very visual person, so I'm telling you what happens when I feel this restlessness. I get this image of like leaves spinning in a windstorm. You know how they're all on the ground in a very specific pattern, then the wind kicks up and starts to swirl them midair. And you think, okay, what is this going to look like when the wind stops? The leaf pattern on the ground has been rearranged, kind of sorted through, and it creates a different look or a different feel. Now, maybe that image is a little out there for you, but that's what's been happening for me. Just the spinning and spinning and spinning, moving so much that it hasn't been able to settle long enough for me to figure out what is this all about. That's how this past year has felt to me. Like something in me has been circling, trying to land, trying to make sense of what is contributing to it. And when this happens, and it's happened before for me, and maybe you can relate, I find myself doing things that is out of character, reaching for books that normally would never grab my attention. I mean, right now I've got children's books I'm reading, theology books, nonfiction books, joyful how-to books. I find myself entering conversations with people or in spaces that I didn't go looking for, but it feels like they have found me. Almost as if there's some kind of, well, we could say divine intervention. I'm sort of feeling and believing that for myself, but for you, it might be something else that you can relate to that is synchronicity at its best, or where you find like, gosh, this was fate that this happened for me. Either way, whatever it is where things start to spin, I know that there is a struggle internal that needs to be resolved. Now, of course, the obvious for me is that this past year has been a very difficult year. My sister died. My husband was diagnosed with cancer and went through treatments simultaneous to my mother being diagnosed with cancer and her treatments. And then the midst of that, a reflective remembrance of the 1 year anniversary of my father's passing. And then we have another baby in our family. I become a grandma for the second time, the most joyful, miraculous gift that has ever been given to me. I keep telling my daughter I will be forever in debt, and she gets a free pass on so many things because she gifted me with these two beautiful little girls who every day bring a reminder of the miracle and the joy of this life. But that didn't happen in sequence. So, of course, beautiful babies being born while people are dying, while grief is settling in. It's what all of you know, and what I hear from so many people is experiences of life and our emotions stack on top of each other. They don't come in page-turning sequences. Like, oh, this is the grief, and now there's the sadness, now there's the joy, now there's the laughter. It happens all at the same time, and it's no wonder that it leaves us sometimes feeling like we are those leaves just in a restless spinning pattern waiting to see how this is all going to look when it finally settles. And on top of the microcosms of our own personal world is the place we find ourselves in our communities and in the world that we are in right now, which feels so angry, so divided, so artificially disconnected from each other. These lines that we've drawn in the sand of red and blue and right and wrong and bias and hate. It's no wonder that that layered on top of our own struggles personally can leave us so vulnerable right now. And the last thing we need was to be living in a place in the social media world where things feel so performative and not honest. Maybe it also comes from being a psychologist for 40 years and realizing that what is happening out there is now showing up in here, in our bodies, in our marriages, in our friendships, in our confidence, and our ability to stay connected. What is becoming really clear to me is that we're all feeling it. That is one of the things I don't think I had fully named for myself. We are all feeling it. For years, the therapy room were places where people talked about grief, fear, relationships, their identities, their health, their family, their work. Of course, all of that is still there. But somewhere along the way, a new layer has entered the therapy room. Conversations about politics, tension, division, people struggling to make sense of families splitting along ideological lines, marriages straining under the values that no longer feel shared, friendships becoming more careful and cautious and guarded. Some conversations have become landmines. And what I began to see more clearly is this. The division is not just between us, but it is within us. It lives in the way we begin to second guess ourselves, and the way we hold back, and the way we smooth things over when something in us wants to speak, and the way we perform, saying that we're fine when we really clearly deep down do not feel fine, struggling to give ourselves permission to acknowledge that. This is how we stop trusting our own instincts. And that gets really costly. It costs us mentally, physically, relationally. It costs us our clarity. And maybe that's why the image of the leaves has stayed with me. Because what I want is not more motion. I want settling. I want clarity. Not the kind that comes from pretentious, quick answers from quote unquote influencers, but the kind that comes when the noise dies down enough for us to hear our own life again. And that's, of course, the long or short answer to what really has led me here. Not because I suddenly decided the world needed another voice or more advice, but because I began to feel more strongly that maybe what we need are fewer fake ones, fewer performative ones, fewer voices selling answers. But maybe what we need is more space where people can think, feel, question, reflect, sort through things honestly. Over the years, patients have often said some version of the same thing to me. Something that goes like, I hear your voice in my head. Sometimes what they mean is that something we talked about came back to them in a hard moment. Sometimes they mean they could hear me asking the question they didn't want to ask themselves. Sometimes they mean they paused before reacting and thought differently because of a conversation we had. That's always touched me. And it's always felt like a privilege. But it also feels like a responsibility. Because let's be honest, words matter. Where we direct our attention matters. How we frame pain matters. How we understand ourselves better matters. And because there are so many voices right now, some fake, some performative, some angry, some careless, some just loud for the sake of being loud, I finally thought, maybe it's time. Maybe it's time to put my voice here. Not to compete with the noise, but to offer hopefully something different, something thoughtful, something based in science, something based out of my 40 years of psychology, something grounded in those years of sitting with people through grief, doubt, fear, illness, courage, and change. That's why this podcast exists. Not because I have all the answers, but because I believe real conversations still matters. I believe thoughtful conversations still matter. I believe that there's something healing about being able to slow down long enough to ask yourself, what is true? What is yours? And what you may have learned just to survive or belong. And because I believe that when people begin to hear themselves more clearly, things start to change. So this first episode is really just about me telling you why I'm here. I'm here because I got tired of the noise. I'm here because the spinning in me needed somewhere to land. I'm here because I think a lot of us are restless, overwhelmed, and hungry for something more honest. And I'm here because after 40 years as a psychologist, I still believe that paying attention, real attention, can change a life. So if there's one thing I hope that you take from this first episode is this: pay attention to your own restlessness. Not all restlessness means something is wrong. Sometimes it means something in you is trying to come into focus. Sometimes it means you're overdue for honesty. Sometimes it means the leaves are still spinning, but they're trying to settle. So instead of rushing past it, maybe sit with it for a moment. Ask yourself, what in me is asking for my attention? What am I trying not to hear? What keeps spinning because I haven't let it land? That's where we begin. And next time, I want to tell you about a young man named Nelson who taught me one of the most important lessons of my life about what it means to be real. Pull up a chair. We're just getting started. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Before you go, if this episode touched something real in you, please consider sharing it with someone who may need that too. If you'd like to stay connected beyond the podcast, sign up for my email list at drloristevick.com. That's where I share more reflections, resources, and an invitation to join the real conversation, which is my free live monthly gathering for women who want deeper conversations beyond the podcast. Until next time, be brave enough to be real.